the oppression of the Negro.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper.
Somewhere we must come to see that we must rise up.
Hello and welcome to MLK Soapbox. My name is Kimon Freeman. We're here to announce the launching of DC's new progressive radio station, 1480 AM, React Radio, where we make revolution sexy. This will be a brand new facility in heart of Southeast, broadcasting live on Martin Luther King Avenue. And since we was broadcasting from Martin Luther King Avenue, and unfortunately most Martin Luther King Avenues in most major cities in this country is probably some of the most crime-infested areas of those cities, we want to put some shine on our fallen hero. And as such, the commercialization of MLK's past, particularly with the unveiling of his memorial this year, we wanted to pay homage to what we believe the speech that got Martin Luther King killed, that was delivered April the 4th, 1967. And as you know, he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, to communicate that the information that he was sharing, the stance that he was taking, was unacceptable. So we have a group of young people who are picking up the torch that's going to express that message in that fire-starting speech that he made many years ago. And so I present to you MLK Soapbox, 1480 AM, making revolution sexy.
Beautiful, I'm somebody.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man.
The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty. All the apathy for conformists, though within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexed as they often do in the case of dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized and by uncertainty. But we must move on.
Some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony, but we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak. And we must rejoice as well, for surely this is the first time in our nation's history that a significant number of its religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of a firm decent base upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. And if it is, let us trace its movement well and pray that our own inner being may be sensitive to its guidance. For we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems so close around us. I come to this platform tonight to make a passionate plea to my beloved nation. This speech is not addressed to Hanai or to the National Liberation Front. It is not addressed to China or to Russia. Nor is it an attempt to overlook the ambiguity of the total situation and the need for a collective solution to the tragedy of Vietnam. Neither is it an attempt to make North Vietnam or the National Liberation Front paragons of virtue, nor to overlook the role they can play in its successful resolution of the problem. Nor they both may have justifiable reason to be suspicious of good faith of the United States. Life and history give eloquent testimony to the fact that conflicts are never resolved without trustful give and to take both sides. Tonight, however, I wish not to speak with Hanai and the NLF, but rather to my fellow Americans, who, with me, bear the greatest responsibility in the ending of conflict that has exacted a heavy price on both continents.
Since I am a preacher by trade, I suppose it is not surprising that I have 7 major reasons for bringing Vietnam into the field of my moral vision. There is at the outset a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in that struggle. It seems as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, throughout the poverty program. Then came the build-up in Vietnam, and I watched the program broken and evacuated as if it was some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds and energies in rehabilitation of its poor. So as long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men, skills, and money like some demonic, destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as the enemy of the poor and to attack it as such.
Perhaps the more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and their husbands to fight and to die in extraordinary high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. So we have been repeatedly faced with cruel irony of watching Negroes and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to see them together in the same schools. So we watched them, in brutal solidarity, burning the huts of a poor village. But we realized that they will never live in the same block on Detroit. I could not be silenced in face of such cruel manipulation of the poor.
My third reason moves to an even deeper level of awareness, for it grows out of my experiences in the ghettos of the North over the last 3 years, especially the last 3 summers. As I walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles will not solve their problems. I tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningful throughout nonviolent action. But they asked, and rightfully so, what about Vietnam? They asked if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without first having spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of hundreds of thousands trembling underneath our violence, I cannot be silent.
Now, it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. It can never be saved so long as it destroys the deepest hopes for all men all over the world. So it is that those of us who are yet determined that America will be led down the path of protest and dissent, working for the health of our land. As if the weight of such commitment to the life and health of America were not enough, another burden of responsibility was placed upon me in 1964. And I cannot forget that the Nobel Prize of Peace was also a commission to work harder than I've ever worked before for the brotherhood of men. This is the calling that takes me beyond national alliances. But even if it were not present, that I would yet have to live with the meaning of my commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. To me, the relationships of this ministry to the making of peace is so obvious that I sometimes marvel at those who ask me, why am I speaking against the war? Could it be that they do not know that the good news was meant for all men? For communists, for capitalists, for the children and ours, for black and for white, for revolutionary and conservative? Have they forgotten that my ministry is in obedience to the one who has loved his enemies so fully that he died for them? What can they say to the Viet Cong or to Castro or to Mao as a faithful minister of this one? Can I threaten them with death, or must I not share with them my life?
Finally, as I try to delineate for you and for myself the road that leads from Montgomery to this place, I would have offered all that was most valid if I simply said that I must be true to my conviction that I share with all men the calling to be a son of the living God. Beyond the calling of race or religion or creed is this vocation of sonship and brotherhood. And because I believe that the Father is deeply concerned, especially for his suffering and helpless and outcast children, I come tonight and speak for them. This I believe to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nations, and for those he calls enemy. But for no document for humans hands can make these humans any less of our brothers.
Now, there's little left to build on, save bitterness. Soon, the only solid physical foundations remaining will be found at our military bases and in the concrete of the concentration camps we called fortified hamlets. These peasants may well wonder if we plan to build our new Vietnam on such grounds as these. Could we blame them for such thoughts? We must speak for them and raise the questions they cannot raise. These too are our brothers. Perhaps the more difficult but no less necessary task is to speak for those who have been designated as our enemies. What of the National Liberation Front, that strangely anonymous group we call VC or communists? What must they think of us in America when they realize that we permitted the repression and cruelty of Diem, which helped to bring them into being as a resistance group in the South? What do they think of our condoning the violence which led to their taking up of arms? How can they believe in our integrity when we now speak of the aggression from the North as if there was nothing more essential to the war? How can they trust us when we now charge them with violence after the murderous reign of Diem and charge them with the violence while we pour every new weapon of death into their land? Surely we must understand their feelings even if we do not condone their actions. Surely we must see that the men we supported pressed them to their violence. Surely we must see that our own computerized plans of destruction simply dwarf their great acts.
Somehow, this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and brother to the suffering poor of Vietnam. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak for the poor of America, who are paying the double price of smashed hopes at home and death and corruption in Vietnam. I speak as a citizen of the world, for the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as an American to the leaders of my own nation. The great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop must be ours.
Meanwhile, we in the churches and synagogues have a continuing task while we urge our government to disengage itself from a disgraceful commitment. We must continue to raise our voices if our nation persists in its perverse ways in Vietnam. We must be prepared to match our actions with words by seeking out every creative means of protest possible. As we counsel young men concerning military service, we must clarify for them our nation's role in Vietnam and challenge them with alternates of constituent objection. I am pleased to say that this path is now being chosen by more than 70 students at my own alma mater, Morehouse College. I recommend it to all who find the American course in Vietnam a dishonorable and unjust one. Moreover, I encourage all ministers of draft age to give up their menstrual exemptions and seek status of constituent objectors. These are the times for real choices and not false ones. We are at the moment of our lives where we must place our lives on the line if our nation is to survive its own falling. Every man of humane convictions must decide on protest that best fits his convictions. But we must all protest.
There is something seductively tempting about stopping there and sending us all off on what in some circles has become a popular crusade against the war in Vietnam. I say we must enter the struggle, but I wish to go on now to say something even more disturbing. The war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit, and if we ignore this sobering reality, we will find ourselves organizing clergy and laymen concerned committees for the next generation. They will be concerned about Guatemala and Peru. They will be concerned about Thailand and Cambodia. They will be concerned about Mozambique and South Africa. We will be marching for these and a dozen other names and attending rallies without end unless there is a significant and profound change in American life and policy. Such thoughts take us beyond Vietnam, but not beyond our calling as sons of the living God. In 1957, a sensitive American official overseas said it seemed to him that our nation was on the wrong side of the world revolution. During the past 10 years, we have seen emerge a pattern of suppression which now has justified the presence of the U.S. military advisors in Venezuela. This need to maintain social stability for our investments accounts for the counter-revolutionary action of American forces in Guatemala. It tells why American helicopters are being used against guerrillas in Colombia and why American napalm and Green Beret forces have already been active against rebels in Peru. It is with such activity in mind that the words of the late John F. Kennedy come back to haunt us. 5 years ago, he said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Increasingly, by choice or by accident, this is the role our nation has taken, the role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and the pleasures that come from the immense profits of overseas investment. I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered.
A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. On the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho Road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries and say, "This is not just." It will look at our alliance with the landed gentry of Latin America and say, "This is not just." The whole The Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. The business of burning human beings with napalm and filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of people normally humane, of sending home from dark and bloody battlefields physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.
Let us hope that this spirit will become the order of the day. We can no longer afford to worship the God of hate or bow before the altar of retaliation. The oceans of history are made turbulent by the ever-rising tides of hate. History is cluttered with the wreckage of nations and individuals that pursued self-defeating path of hate. As Arnold Toynbee says, love is the ultimate force that makes for the saving choice of life and good against the damning choice of death and evil. Therefore, the first hope in our inventory must be the hope that love is going to have the last word. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. This is unfolding. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there isn't such thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with the loss of opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at the flood, it ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is deaf to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilians are written the pathetic words, too late. There is an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. The moving finger writes, and having writ moves on. We still have a choice today: nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation.
Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. This is the calling of the sons of God, and our brothers wait eagerly for our response. Shall we say the odds are too great? Shall we say that the struggle's too hard? Will our message be that the forces of American life militated against their arrival as full men, and we send our deepest regrets? Or will there be another message of longing, of hope, of solidarity with their yearnings, of commitment to their cause, whatever the cost? The choice is ours, and though we might prefer it otherwise, we must choose in this crucial moment of human history.
Nothing in this world is more dangerous than conscientious stupidity and sincere ignorance.
Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love.
Rarely do we find men who are willingly engaged in solid, hard thinking. There's almost a universal quest for easy answers and half-baked solutions. Nothing pays people more than having to think.
Our scientific power has outwon our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men.
I submit to you that a man that hasn't discovered something that he will die for isn't fit to live.
Whatever is your life's work is, do it well. A man should do his job so well that the living, the dead, and the unborn can do no better.
We must come together as brothers or perish together as fools.
The prophetic nature of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was so at odds with the status quo that he was vilified and eventually assassinated. As history inevitably absolved him, the status quo sterilized and commercialized his legacy. But as we see, his words still pertinent and his legacy still present, his truth crushed to the earth still rises again.